Purple Party people at? Where they at?
And now, your host for the evening, the Rolling Stones. And now, your host for this evening, Welcome to episode 107 of Amari Purple Talk, a podcast where I share my thoughts on the Prince musical singularity. I'm Richard Cole, your host for the evening, and Happy New Year. It's good to be back. And before we dive into the show, thank you once again for tuning in. Please leave your comments in the comment section below, and please download on your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And please continue to send your questions or topic suggestions for Amari Purple Talk. And how you can do that is by clicking the link in the show notes below, either the website link for Amari Communications or by following me on Twitter at RichardCole_now using the hashtag Amari Purple Talk, and your topic or question might just be read in a future episode. All right, so let's dive right in. There's a lot to cover. Hence the title of this episode, Protecting Our Black Legends. This is also a very Prince-centric topic as well. Considering his stance on owning your masters, your publishing, just being educated on not only just the music business, but to inspire us in our various endeavors, whether we intend to own something or if you're just trying to navigate your career to get paid what you're worth, what your value is. So just kind of over the last year, it seems to be open season on Legends catalogs. You've been reading in the news where Bob Dylan sold his publishing for $400 million. Bruce Springsteen sold his to Sony for $500 million. And I mean, just the list goes on and on. We've seen where Primary Wave has accumulated a very huge stake to the Prince estate. So making all future decisions or having a major say in any and all decisions regarding any Prince material or his likeness, his, any type of intellectual property. They have a big say-so in that. Recently, we've had James Brown, whose estate, after lots of infighting, that got settled. And not long after that got settled, they sold to Primary Wave for $90 million. We've heard that Tina Turner, prior to that, has sold hers for $50 million. Now, if you kind of see the disparity in the numbers here, you see, again, James Brown, $90 million. You see Tina Turner, $50 million. But you see a Bob Dylan, $400 million. Bruce Springsteen, $500 million. Now, Tina, granted, has written a few songs. She didn't write all of her hits, but she has written quite a few on her own, especially during the Ike and Tina Turner period. So as far as a value or a dollar amount to be placed, yeah, it's kind of easy to sit on the sidelines, where we all get to play kind of, Monday morning quarterback and say, oh, 50 million, she should have, that should be, Bruce Springsteen numbers. He should be getting 500 million, considering, she's at the beginnings of rock and roll. James Brown, the creator of funk, has been around since the 1950s, first round inductee into the Hall of Fame, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And you would think 90 million, it should be higher. And, it's caused a bit of a kind of an uproar in social media, or kind of having people kind of scratch their heads a bit. You know, are black artists being lowballed? Smokey Robinson, I think, another one that sold to. I'm not sure if if that was Primary Wave or not, or one of the major record labels. I know Bob Dylan. That was Universal that made that deal for 400 million. Again, Sony with Bruce Springsteen, Primary Wave, James Brown, Prince, and I want to say Smokey Robinson as well. But I do remember reading that, Smokey Robinson's number was very, very low. Now, we don't know all the, legal language involved with these deals. Like I said, on the surface, it appears, our black artists are being kind of lowballed a bit. Of course, in the grand scheme of the music business, kind of rock and roll, kind of now country music, those are sort of the big, huge money makers. Depending on where you are in hip hop, that still generates a lot of major bank for record labels. But R&B, jazz, blues, those things, classical, those things kind of now are kind of falling to the wayside, So, like I said, should there be a cause for alarm? The Stones still hold on to their, they haven't sold out. The Beatles as a group, all four, Paul, Ringo, the estates of John Lennon and George Harrison, they all have to unanimously agree for a major project comes out, or for them to authorize a project to come out. As far as the solo Beatles work, they all managed to retain total ownership. Maybe Yoko will do a deal temporarily, but after a certain number of years, it reverts back to her. So, she makes, hustles for that big money and retains that ownership. And when you have that ownership and you know how to make those deals, you can do that. But like I said, there's a big concern as to what's going on and why. So what I'm going to do this episode is try to kind of dig in deep and maybe try to make sense of it all, and maybe just kind of give my assessment of it at the end. So one item, this was from NPR, and this is something that they reported on, and this was after David Bowie making a major deal. So the estate of David Bowie made a deal to Warner Brothers for a deal. So I'm going to kind of read some parts of that article. And I'll start with David Bowie's estate has reached a deal to sell the music icon's songwriting catalog to Warner Music Group's Warner Chappell in one of the biggest music publishing deals to date. And according to a press release from Warner Chappell, the agreement comprises songs from the 26 David Bowie studio albums released during his lifetime, as well as the posthumous studio album release, Toy. It also includes the 2 studio albums from Tin Machine, alongside tracks released as singles from soundtracks and other projects. Now, the company did not divulge financial details, but sources told Variety that the deal, which includes Bowie's entire body of work, was worth more than $250 million. So the deal will bring nearly all of the Thin White Duke's catalog under the Warner umbrella. The newly acquired catalog stretches across 60 years and includes iconic songs like Heroes, Changes, Space Odyssey, Fame, Let's Dance, Rebel Rebel, Golden Years, and Ziggy Stardust. It's the latest deal for Warner, who has also snapped up catalogs for Bruno Mars, Cardi B, Quincy Jones, Anderson .Paak, Let's see, Swasawiti. I guess I'm pronouncing that correctly. And the estate of George Michael. Okay, and it goes on to say that the Bowie estate previously aligned with Warner Music Group in 2013 to handle the singer's recorded catalog, which the label has aggressively reissued in the years following Bowie's 2016 death. In September, that partnership was renewed, with Warner also adding the music Bowie recorded from 2000 until 2016's Black Star. That new licensing agreement will begin in 2023. So we kind of know that as David Bowie was facing his mortality, that he laid out a very detailed plan to handle his catalog upon his transition. So this, in this particular case, sounds like that is just the next step in that plan, is how I'm interpreting it. As far as the other names mentioned, like, there's Bruno Mars, there's Anderson .Paak, there's Cardi B, there's George Michael, there's Quincy Jones. So in that particular case with Warner's, there's a more diverse. And again, we don't know the financial details or how many millions were involved in each case. Of course, each case is going to be contract specific. So it's something to kind of keep in mind. Also, speaking of David Bowie, as I was reading this a few days prior, is that it reminds me of back in the 90s when they started doing those Pullman bonds. And then this was something that David Bowie was at the very forefront of. So I kind of went back and did some digging to kind of refresh my memory on what the Pullman bond was. And it was also kind of garnered the nickname of the Bowie bond because he was sort of the first one to do it. Ron Isley of the Isley Brothers, or the Isley Brothers as a group, they were kind of the second group to do this, this kind of a bond deal. So I'm going to read a definition of what this Bowie bond is. So a Bowie bond was a unique type of a Bowie bond was a unique type of asset-backed security which used as collateral the royalty streams from current, at least at that time, and future album sales and live performances by David Bowie. Bowie bonds are also sometimes known as Pullman bonds after David Pullman, the banker who created and sold the first Bowie bonds. So it gives a definition on what this actually is. So the Bowie bond, or Bowie bonds, were first issued in 1997 when David Bowie partnered with Prudential Insurance Company and raised $55 million by promising investors income generated by his back catalog at that time of 25 albums. The 25 albums were issued as the underlying assets for Bowie bonds, were recorded prior to 1990 and included classics such as The Man Who Sold the World, Ziggy Stardust, and Heroes. David Bowie used proceeds from the bond sale to purchase old recordings of his music owned by his former manager. His rights to royalties from wholesale sales in the U.S. were securitized into bonds. In effect, by creating the bonds, he ultimately forfeited royalties for the life of the bond. Okay, so when all this was going on in the 90s, and when Prince was still fighting for control of his masters, there was one interview, I forget which magazine, but he did mention these bonds. He said, hey, when I get my masters, I'm going to get me one of those bonds too. And because it was a good deal to where for a finite number of years, you forfeit those royalties, but you get this lump sum of cash. It's sort of like, okay, for instance, if you win the lottery, say like this current one that's going on now, what is it, 600 and something million, which when by the time I'm recording this, winning numbers have already been announced. But that being said, say you win, say 690 million. Okay, so you can have an option of getting that money, whatever it is, month to month, in installments. Or you can opt out and get sort of the lump sum payout. Now, the beauty of it is that in that case, it's one time, you get the lump sum, you get taxed on it. So whatever that comes out to in taxes, I think this current one is kind of crazy where it's 690 million, but after tax, then it's down to 125 million. Hell, I'll still take it. That's, a little bit of something is better than a whole lot of nothing. So that's basically it. That's basically a gist or kind of an analogy of what these Pullman bonds represented at the time. So you get this big lump sum payout. You forfeit your royalties, but you got, in this case back then, 55 million, which in 1990s dollars was a lot of money. That might end up being maybe about 100 million or something like that in today's money. So that's it. And then at the end of that term, then you get your rights back, and then you're back to getting your royalties again. So if you invested your 55 million well, you sitting on top of a bunch of money, and then when that bond comes up and then the royalties start coming back in, and you're back to getting that, and you're still getting money off of it. And I think Prince saw that, and had he got his master's in the 90s, he would have gone for something like that probably, or something that would have been uniquely beneficial to him. Like I said, this worked out well for David Bowie. There are some pros and cons to it. It gets into things like, when issued, there's at the time the Bowie bonds had a face value of $1,000 with an interest rate of 7.9% and a maturity of 10 years. They were also self-liquidating bonds. That is, the principal declined each year. So Bowie bonds represented one of the first instances of a bond that used intellectual property as the underlying collateral. The bonds were appealing to investors because they presented what was at the time viewed as a steady, long-term investment. Also, the bonds were purchased by investors who seized the opportunity to own a piece of a favorite rock star. In addition, top credit rating agencies such as Moody's Investor Service gave the bonds an investment-grade rating, indicating that Bowie bonds were subject to a low risk of default. So the reason why this didn't continue today is because of the advent of streaming. First it started Napster, then Apple Music, and then nowadays we have Tidal, Spotify, Apple Music, Qobuz, Amazon Music, Pandora, you name it. So that kind of put a threat on the value of making that type of deal. But now, as we're into the 21st century, and these things are now a standard or a major part of the main record industry, then it makes sense for these record companies to go in and make these deals or make these offers to capitalize on that. And there's, I would, given that the majority of the people that are making these deals are legends, granted, Bruno Mars is, several albums into kind of becoming a legend in his own time right now. Cardi B, has a number of albums. I don't know how many, but enough to where if she's warranting this type of a deal with Warner's, Anderson .Paak, Quincy Jones, that's definitely a legend. So again, these things are contract specific. So like I said, each situation, one person's 50 million is another person's 500 million. So that being said, there's different reasons why these artists are entering into these deals. The NPR article goes into the situation. I think they also, they did. They also reported on the David Bowie one. That was the most recent. But in regards to Bruce Springsteen, that was sort of the week before Bowie's announcement. So their article explaining why huge musicians who were not exactly starving artists and famously careful about creative control, why sell so much of their previous back catalog? The article insinuates that the pandemic is a part of it. And that's a quote from a Tatiana, let me see if I'm getting this last name correctly, Ciriciano. So Tatiana Ciriciano, a music analyst at Midea Research. Let's see, touring has been stalled for some time, and it could be stalled again. Even Bruce Springsteen took a hit when it came to revenues from live performances and touring last year. And as Ciriciano points out, these musicians, accountants know very well that capital gains taxes may challenge unfavorably for people holding such assets. Moreover, to be blunt, many of these musicians are senior citizens. They're planning their estates. So on the one hand, and like I said, with the recent Twitter uproar and a lot of us Prince fans that, we listened, like he was E.F. Hutton about, ownership and, own your masters and own your publishing. And I'm changing my name to an unpronounceable symbol so I can fight for that right and do this and do that. On the one hand, it's like, oh no, they should hold on to it and don't let go. Even within the estate, for them, for the family members that had to sell or felt like they had to sell their shares of the estate to get that sort of cash sum. Again, you're going to have the detractors out there that are pretty much, they're going to be, well, Prince wouldn't have wanted it that way, and Prince wouldn't have wanted this, and Prince wouldn't have wanted that, and Prince didn't do. Like I said, we're, again, I just sit in a little room, little tiny little room in the basement, and do this podcast. And I do music just for my own personal enjoyment. I don't expect to be on the cover of Rolling Stone next week or whatever. And as much as I would love to sit and create stuff all day, every day, there's still a business that, you have to attend to. There's still whatever. You're dealing with copyright forms. You're dealing with, operating agreements. You're dealing with licensing agreements. In case of the record industry, publishing agreements and the whole nine. You're dealing with all that stuff. And, for, like I said, the case of David Bowie, he kind of knew his time on this trend, on this position. Sorry, I can't talk. David Bowie's time on this dimensional plane was finite, and probably even more finite than he had even realized. So with knowing that, he was able to lay out a plan. I'm sure that Bruce Springsteen, has a plan. Bob Dylan has a plan. John Lennon had a will, even though he was a young man at 40, he didn't set out to die. That was somebody grossly interrupting someone's divine purpose on earth out of, ignorance and selfishness. But when you're dealing with those large sums of money, estate planning, whether you're 25 or 95 is important. And granted, while say Yoko and Sean, they're well educated on the music business and they can navigate those waters. George trained his son Danny to kind of navigate those waters as well, and they can execute their estates well. Not every major artist has a family that is well versed in the industry, but these things are thrust into the laps. And again, like I said, for those that are sitting, it's easy to sit in your rooms wherever you are, and especially if you're not musician. I don't care if you're famous or not. If you're not a musician and you've got this catalog of song, that somebody related to you has this catalog of songs, they transition. Of course, you would want them still here, alive and well. But if they've transitioned and this falls into your lap, if you've got a better plan, then by all means, when that's dropped in your lap, I wish you well. Do what you got to do. But sometimes these things are thrust in people's laps where, it's not easy to make those decisions. Or it's not easy in the case of Prince, who didn't have a plan, and now this stuff is falling into their lap. And on top of that, they're getting kind of somewhat ripped off a little bit. I mean, the dust is finally settling on the whole tax thing, which is a problem when you don't have a will or you don't have a plan. What are you going to do? It's like you're still going to your, you still got to go to your not, essentially non-essential, essential gig for peanuts in today's climate with rising prices and trying to struggle to make ends meet and feed your family. Meanwhile, you're a major decision maker in a catalog that's worth, I forget what the net worth, what is it, 100 and, so for those Prince fans, educate me on the actual number, but let me just say 150 million, something like that, or which it's been valued at now 60 million or something. Again, those are questions I have, but for the sake of this argument, you sit there and decide what to do when $60 million are on the table. So to sit there and say, well, Prince went in this person and that person, or it's easy to say ownership. We're not in these people's pockets. We're shopping out of these, legends or their families, whether they're still around, the legends, or whether it's the estates and their families having to deal with this. And it's easy to be in their pockets when all we have to do is go on Amazon and plop down, $10 for a single CD or $100 for a super deluxe edition. It's easy for us to say, oh, well, why don't you do this and why don't you do that? It's not that easy. And like I said, even if you don't have a family situation where there's millions of dollars on the table, there's people that act stupid over breadcrumbs when somebody passes. The person could leave nothing. The house could be in disarray. It could be falling apart and people want to fight over it. Or there's $10 in a closet somewhere and people want to, come to blows over $10 about it. So don't give me that, what so-and-so would have done, because here's the thing. If so-and-so was here, there'd be no discussion. If so-and-so was here, there'd be no episode. Prince would be very well qualified to comment on this current situation and how he would react to it. But as it is right now, we're very blessed to have a situation where we have had reissues out the wazoo over the last 5 years. Now, that's just standalone album reissues, and more on the way in just a few weeks. What, about 3 more weeks? We've had 2 legendary classic albums get the super deluxe treatment. That's a blessing, to get that. Again, like I said, I would trade it all in to have Prince here doing new music. I got a playlist, kind of, it's a mixture of stuff from Artificial Age and Phase 1 and 2. and was just kind of, just kind of vibing off of those songs for a minute. And, it's just, it's that thing of it's 2014, it's 2015, and yeah, he was still around to make those songs. I would love to see where, back in those days, I was very hyped to see what was coming next after, Hit and Run Phase 2. The rumblings of Black is the New Black. Or he was going to put out a piano and microphone live album. I was hyped for that. I was excited for that. What the Beautiful Ones book should have been? Ooh, I'd trade all of these super deluxe editions and reissues, and I'd settle for the crappy bootleg cassette tracks just to have him here to fulfill just those three things by themselves, to do that. So, but, to have positive energy and to have positive thoughts continue to travel to him wherever he is, then, it's something to celebrate. I mean, it could be worse. You could be a Michael Jackson fan right now and get handed crap and told that it's the best Thanksgiving dinner ever. Because, I mean, there's no super deluxe editions for Thriller. There's no super deluxe editions for Off the Wall. There's no, Dangerous's anniversary is come and gone, and the only thing they got was a nice piece of color vinyl, folks. That's it. The Jacksons, all the Destiny album and Triumph, just those two albums alone, never mind the stuff that came before it on Epic Records. They were just thrown onto digital with a couple of remixes and single edits. No vault tracks, nothing. Those deserve CD reissues and vinyl reissues. And, Destiny deserves a super deluxe. Triumph deserves a super deluxe. Off the Wall, Thriller. Bad got a kind of a special edition, kind of close to a box set. That was about it. That's it. No posthumous, there's no Welcome to America type Michael Jackson or Jackson's album that's laying around anywhere like that. So, and he's been gone longer. So I don't know. It's hard to kind of justify either way. Like I said, these, for legends, yeah, if they're in their 70s, their 60s, their 70s, their 80s, as far as age. And yeah, if your bread and butter was still touring, and because of a pandemic, you can't go out on tour, then yeah, you got to get that money somehow, some way. The royalties, yeah, you think that, oh, they're getting millions. And again, we're sitting here because we plop down our $10 for a CD, whether we get it from Best Buy or your record store or Amazon or Target, wherever. And it's like we're happy because it's like we break open that package and plop the CD in, or we pop the vinyl and drop the needle on it, or it's released on streaming and we just, we're paying our $10 a month for Apple or Tidal or whatever you paying for. And it's like, oh, you just hyped on that new music. And, that album costs a lot of money just for the studio expense alone, let alone the marketing. That might just be cheaper just to throw it on the streaming service, but you still got to manufacture that vinyl. That's still a cost. You still got to manufacture that CD. You got to put the nice little artwork and the nice little booklet together, the nice album cover, all that stuff. And that costs money, but we think about just putting down that $10 or that $25 for the vinyl. Again, pay your 10, 15, $20 for whatever level of streaming service you're on. And we're happy, It's like a drug, you just like, yes, new music. yeah. New music. But like I said, we're not in their pockets. They put all that blood, sweat, and tears into all that classic material to get to a certain plateau or a certain lifestyle in life, and to maintain it, yeah, granted, depending on who you are, yeah, those royalties, but sometimes that can go either way because some years are better than others. Sometimes you might make so much in royalties and nobody's saying your name anywhere. It's just those diehards, maybe buying an album to replace the one they've worn out or something, or maybe some 1-2 new people that week about, just finding out about you. And then you get those moments where there's certain anniversary dates or certain milestones, or time goes by, or somebody puts a song in a movie and people go, oh yeah, that person's great. Oh, and everybody runs out and starts buying up the old albums. Or unfortunately, somebody transitions to another plane and then all of a sudden people rush to buy everything that's out there. And, when they were number, 87 on the charts, then all of a sudden now they're number one, but they're no longer here. And, even the younger artists, they're more dependent on touring. Because like I said, they're still building their bones in this industry. It's like, okay, fine, you got a few platinum albums or whatever. And again, depending on what your original record deal is, you're not quite at that legend status, where, say the Jackson 5 were getting, what, half a penny per album on that Motown. Joe signed a very crappy contract with Motown for those boys. So they had to tour and do Las Vegas and have TV shows and stuff to kind of make it. I think it wasn't until they got that Epic deal to where they got a little bit more money coming in. And then, of course, Jermaine staying behind probably negotiated a little bit of a better deal than what he had when he was in the Jackson 5. But, again, where your standard record industry contract, it's cents on the dollar. I think even in the 90s, I don't know, I used to keep up with these things more so in the 90s. But I think, where I would say, your Prince or Whitney Houston or, George Michael, I think they were kind of getting like roughly about maybe 50 cents a record or something. Like Michael Jackson kind of had one of the biggest, I think it was like $1.25 a record. And that's just the record royalty. That's just off of every record sold or every album sold. That was initially the 50 cents, for the big guys. And then Michael was getting like $1.25 per record. So that doesn't count the publishing aspect of it. So, of course, if they produced the record, if they wrote the songs on the record, then that's a bigger income stream. But it's separate in your contract as opposed, from what you would get just per record as just the artists themselves. So like, someone like a Whitney Houston was getting 50 cents. Maybe later it got to be $1, or what was that one point where L.A. Reid got a big multi-million-dollar contract, with the big like about, I forget what that number was. It was about up there. Wasn't 100 million, I don't think. But, getting that in advance. And I would probably assume probably a little bit higher royalty rate as well. Once the terms of the contract have been fulfilled after that. But, I mean, what does this mean for, again, our black legends, with James Brown? I think even at the time of his death, I know his estate, it was reported as being worth at the time $100 million. It was devalued to $90 million. Again, I'm not quite sure. But one thing to take into consideration, where, with James Brown, who's done a lot to kick open the doors for funk, to kick open the doors for a lot of black artists, one of the first to really have a lot of control over his career, whether it was his publishing, his masters, whatever, or Ray Charles. We forget they were, uniquely touring and recording. They didn't do a lot in the way of motion pictures or, big outside projects that would value you at more. Like, I don't, none of them starred in a major motion picture or produced a motion picture or directed a motion picture to warrant, some type of an additional net worth. Where, you have Michael Jackson, that's, in case of maybe not necessarily major motion pictures, he was on the verge of that until the first set of allegations kicked in, and that sort of put the kibosh on a lot of big movie deals that he was working towards. But Prince, whether, of course, Purple Rain's the big one, but there's also the two films he directed, Graffiti Bridge and Under the Cherry Moon. Well, it's Sign of the Times also, the concert film. Those things kind of add value because that's a major motion picture. Whether, it was successful or not, doesn't matter. They still made those, type of successes in that area. Same thing with Whitney Houston, big transition into acting in movies. So you have that going on. Whatever your investments, like in the case of Michael Jackson, there was, getting into the publishing, first buying Sly Stone's publishing catalog and then Little Richard's and quite a few. The Beatles is the big one everybody talks about, but that complete portfolio had so much. And then when it kind of transitioned into him splitting half of that with Sony, that's now worth billions now. I mean, they own, I think, all the songs in the world. I think Paul McCartney owns the other half, the songs in the world. Universal's got a big chunk, and now Warner's got a big chunk of the publishing pie of a lot of folks now. So, again, kind of with James Brown as a template, okay, you can kind of make the argument 90 million. I mean, I personally, again, like I said, I'm not spending out of the family's pockets or anything like that. I just personally think it's worth more than that in terms of impact. But then when you look at these companies and they're the ones that are offering, well, here's the 90 million, here's, the 500 million for Springsteen. And, Dylan, I would say, James Brown is, like I said, he's a lot of his songs, a lot of social commentary in a lot of the songs. I mean, a lot of songs were just pure fun. They were just the funk. Or it was still about, having fun, or I love you, I don't love you, or whatever typical songs. But there's also the say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. There's I don't want nobody to give me nothing. Open up the door, I'll get it myself. There's, soul power, so it's very important songs in that catalog that was a voice definitely for, black generations, where Bob Dylan was the so-called voice of a generation. It's a title that even he kind of cringed a bit, on hearing it. But when you talk about how these songs are going to be utilized, then, of course, Bruce Springsteen's stuff is going to end up in commercials and movies, and Dylan stuff will be in movies and things that I would say the mainstream, and when I mean mainstream, probably, just white folks in general. Yeah. I mean, of course, it's going to cater to them. It's going to, it'll be in a big budget Oscar production or somebody's cult classic fun popcorn movie. Some of these songs can, heck, end up in an MCU movie. And I mean, that's relevant, but that reaches all of us. But, but for the most part, it'll be some rom-com or something, or it'll be some movie that'll utilize the songs like in almost a musical sort of thing, or the music will be used to forward the narrative, but can't, we can make those kind of movies and make them be hits. We've had the, two Best Man movies to where those were mainstream successes. They transcended the black audience. And yeah, to put a James Brown song or a Prince song into a production like that, yeah, I mean, so shouldn't it be worth more than 90 million for James Brown. Like I said, again, for the tax, I guess to finally accept the tax people to accept the value as valid of $60 million. And when we think Prince is definitely worth more, 150 minimum, now maybe that will increase in time. Again, I mean, Prince is in a very good place, I think. He can speak for a generation, and he also speaks for us. Or I should say, he can speak for the world, and he can also speak for us. And I think he has a pretty good position of increasing his worth. And I mean, given the volume of material that comes out, people are going to rediscover Purple Rain. People are going to then go on to discover 1999 and Sign of the Times. And they'll go on to discover all the good 90s stuff, all the great, 2000 stuff. I think he kind of has that momentum of like the Beatles, where it's 50 years later and they can just put out the same 10 albums and they still, or whatever, and it still goes to number one, with like the 50th anniversary edition of Abbey Road, and then just recently Let It Be. Both of those number one albums. I think Prince, hell, he dropped a album that nobody saw coming, and that was in the top 5 this past year, Welcome to America. So I think, he has that potential to where it'll be 50 years later and, stuff will still be hitting the top 10. Stuff will still go to number 1, and new generations will discover it. And depending on how tastefully it's utilized, we've got a documentary that is supposedly coming in 2023. We're still waiting for that official announcement. But once that Netflix documentary drops, that's going to be there for generations to discover and learn about Prince. And that probably won't be the last one. There'll be many more projects and films and biopics and you name it. So, but then, there's Tina Turner. But Tina Turner has a pretty good life right now. She doesn't have to tour anymore. She didn't even have to, I don't think she had to make this deal, really. But, if, again, you're in your, 60s or your 70s or your 80s in age, or pushing 90, and then, you kind of want to be comfortable in your final act. And that's something to think about. We live in this sort of commercialized world, to where there is, this type of value is placed on our entertainers, or value is placed on things, whether it's jewelry or cars or house or, homes, you name it. I was about to go into the Morris Day thing, clothes, credit cards, houses, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, so we live in this commercialized world where these things have a monetary value, where in ancient times they didn't. It's about living your best quality of life in the best spiritual vein that you could. But now that we live in that, then yeah, you have a right to make as much money as you want, or it's okay to pursue wealth. It's just, just don't pursue it for the sake of wealth itself. Have a spiritual center. And again, a lot of these entertainers that we look up to, whether they're actors or singers or whatever they do, they've earned the right to make whatever they make, and they have a right to be comfortable, doing it. So, a lot of times I'm tired of the tragic, so-and-so died broke, scenario. I'm tired of seeing that one, reading that story all the time. So yeah, these people have a shot at making it. Cool, go for it. But again, like I said, when it comes to, again, our Smokey Robinsons, it's like, now here's an example. I would say Smokey Robinson and James Brown and Prince, I would say at least those three should be getting 200, 300, 400, 500 million dollars. But again, that's just my personal opinion. So where am I on all of this? my thing is, like I said, they have a right to make the deal. If it's somebody's estate and it's left to the family. And remember, James Brown only knew what was going on in James Brown's head. Prince only knew what was going on in Prince's head. So to be able to navigate those deals and decide, okay, I do, write, record my albums, or I do this on tour. I want to do this. I want to do that. I know what I'm worth. And whether he had good people or whether they had good people making those decisions for them, or times where they didn't, at least when they got to this point, there's some money to have and to leave behind. So with them, with their families, and like I said, half of the estate, like I said, they probably just got tired of waiting. And it's like, no, I got to eat now. So I'll go ahead and make this deal and live now. Because then again, a lot of those relatives are up there as well. They're in their 50s and 60s and 70s in age. And it's like, again, none of us set out to, again, we don't want to be homeless. We don't want to be broke. We don't want to be starving, or we don't want to leave our loved ones, and just ruin or whatever. So good on them for making, they're making decisions, and those are the best decisions made for their journeys. And we should still go ahead and celebrate it. Now, again, what does it mean for us that pay our $10 for a CD, or our $25 for vinyl, or pay our $10 a month for streaming? Our responsibility in all of this is to not let our legends, whether they're here still walking the earth or whether they've transitioned on, let's keep their names out there just as much as the Beatles. I love the Beatles. Since I was 10, God loved their music. Watched the Get Back documentary, loved that. Although Summer of Soul is the best documentary movie of the year. That's not taken away from what Peter Jackson accomplished, but Summer of Soul as a complete just a single standalone documentary for theatrical release, that was hands down the best movie. But I love the Get Back, all 3 episodes of that. I got the super deluxe editions, I got CDs, I got some vinyl. They're great. But like I said, they're not going to have a problem in another 50 years. They're going to, next 50 years, they're going to be the Beethovens and the Bachs. How here we are in the 21st century and we still rattle those names off, Mozart's. Prince is going to be the modern day Mozart, even 50, 100 years, 200 years down the line. Prince is going to be there. Stevie Wonder is going to be there, and that's the thing. But it's like we have to be the ones to kind of help push that narrative. And there's a lot of people, that listen to this podcast from other countries. Of course, you're listening to this podcast because you love music. Not just Prince music. Some of you out there, you love the Beatles, or you love the blues, or you love jazz, or you love, heavy metal, you love country, you love whatever's indigenous to your culture, that music, whether it's Indian music or whatever, classic, Chinese music, whatever, you love different types of music. And especially on the cultural level, how important it is to maintain that culture. And right now, again, as far as our Black legends, as far as some Black artists, I don't know, where the industry is really successful in marginalizing these, R&B music now and hip hop, to where, we don't have the artists that can set themselves apart from what's going on. We should have some artists out there, not to say that they should be exactly like Prince or they should be exactly the next Michael Jackson, But, we need somebody that can come out with something that doesn't sound like anybody else, that's not reliant on whoever the hot production team is working on the computers right now, you know, that's already, done 10 tracks for Beyonce, that's done 10 tracks for Chris Brown, that's done 10 tracks for whoever. We don't need that anymore. We need those artists out there. We need those groups out there that can really, really change the game and change it for the better, change it for the positive. Again, create the people that are going to, where they're going to be remembered in 400 years' time. And it's like they'll be mentioned like this is the black classical music where there's Prince, there's Stevie Wonder, and, whatever single artist or whatever band that can change the game like that. That's our job to kind of keep that going, to keep it going. Here we've got where the industry has got George Clinton stuff locked up, the Parliament stuff, the classic Parliament stuff. I could have sworn he announced that he's got ownership of the Warner Brothers Funkadelic albums. I mean, the big four, Hardcore Jollies, One Nation Under Groove, Uncle Jam Wants You, Electric Spanking of War Babies, those, four Warner Brothers era Funkadelic albums. I think he has that, but I haven't, we don't have the vinyl yet. We don't have the CD. So I don't know if it's a thing to where he has to wait a certain amount of years before he can drop that, or if he's just waiting for the right deal. But then there's also all that good Westbound era stuff. There's, all the Parliament stuff that's in limbo. I think some of it was just starting to get reissued on vinyl. But again, the ones that a lot of people want, like Funkadelic, Motor Booty Affair, Glory Hall of Stupid, at least those three, I don't think they've gotten the reissue yet. Yeah, we're waiting on those. It's cool we can get all this Beatles stuff, and it's cool that McCartney has his archive collection, and it's cool that Dylan drops stuff all the time, and it's cool that the Zappa estate drops stuff all the time. All that stuff is cool and it's great, and they get my dollars. But in addition to Prince Super Deluxe editions, yeah, I want some Parliament Funkadelic Deluxe editions, some George Clinton Super Deluxe editions. I want to see those things see the light of day. And Earth, Wind, and Fire. Now back in the 90s, box sets were a big deal. And, but not like the fever pitch that it is now, I think. That's just kind of how I'm feeling towards it. Because it's like, now I'm more aware of it. Now it's like, oh, I'm actively, and I don't know, maybe it's because of Prince. But, yeah, I'm actively going out like, oh, I got to have that 1999 Super Deluxe, Or in the case of the Beatles, oh, I got to have that Sgt. Pepper Super Deluxe. But now in an era where it seems to be that is sort of the thing now, then we need that Temptations box set back out. There was one in the 90s that was pretty good, but now the way they do these things, deluxe editions for certain albums, maybe not all Motown albums could warrant that, but some kind of a super deluxe where you get the album. If you got a live show you can attach to it, or maybe there were certain cuts that were intended for the album. A lot of that, like Motown was really good at that, and especially with the Jackson 5, up until about 2010, 2011. But it's just kind of like these little, it's like, okay, here's the Jackson's reissue ABC. Okay, here's the Jackson 5 issue of Greatest Hits. And it just kind of comes and goes. Like, oh yeah, gonna get it. It's great. But then, you get these big Rolling Stone reviews or little one-page articles. Bob Dylan's Super Deluxe edition of this era comes out. Or, Beatles get 3 or 4 pages in Rolling Stone of this coming out. And again, don't get me started on the Monkees. Now, I love the Monkees too. But to me, they've got better respect in terms of reissues and super, deluxe editions and vault tracks. I mean, Monkees fans really are into their vault tracks. I mean, just like Prince fans. And there's, books about Monkees sessions and stuff like that. And I mean, that's cool and that's great. Does every artist need that? I don't know. But yeah, I do want to see stuff like that on Stevie Wonder. There is a book that I do have about Stevie Wonder's recording sessions, but I want one as detailed as what Dwayne Tudor puts out. I want that type of, respect given to a Stevie Wonder. Again, Michael Jackson, Jacksons, I want that type of respect given to them as far as, not just super deluxe editions or vault tracks or better compilations or live albums, but, I want books on their recording sessions as well. A good, really solid Netflix style Jackson's documentary. Yeah. I want to see our legends get that. Tina's got hers, so that's cool. That documentary, I still have to check that out. But I guess that's the thing. We just have to kind of, at this point, the major record industry, whether it's Sony, whether it's Warner Brothers, Universal, whether it's Primary Wave, snatching up the publishing and all this, the likeness, and, they're going to put the likeness in the commercial or put them on a t-shirt or put them on a box of cereal or whatever it is. Not necessarily saying that we have to support the box of cereal or whatever, but when it comes to the music, which is the foundation, then we have to vote with our dollars on how that music is utilized. So, like, I hated that Let's Go Crazy was a credit card commercial. Let's vote with our dollars. Let's vote with our social media. Let's let these estates know, as a fan base, what do you want? What does, that's the thing. Because they're always going to make decisions and they're going to base it on what's going to maximize their dollars. But it's us that's spending the money. We're buying the records, we're buying the merchandise, we're buying, we'll go see the film, we'll watch the documentary. Let them know, let the Prince estate know, or whoever you're a fan of, whoever has, go on, Primary Wave's Twitter account, whatever, and just say, hey, I would love to see this, and if they see it, then, they'll know. Or if it's a thing to where like, they're going to do a Prince biopic on Lifetime and Leonardo DiCaprio is going to play Prince, then, then it's our job to go on social media and go, oh no, no, we don't want to see that one. No, not that. I mean, Leonardo DiCaprio's the dude and all, but no, that's the thing, and we have to, whether you're a podcaster, whether you have a blog, then, to keep the music legacy alive. So even if we can't stop a Lifetime biopic starring, I don't know, Gilbert Godfrey is Prince, then if we can't stop that, then it's our job to, again, for me to do another episode of Amari Purple Talk and talk about the music and the artistry. And it's up to all the other podcasters to do the same thing in their own voices. And if we have blogs, write your blogs. If you have websites, whatever, or your social media and you got thousands and hundreds of thousands of followers or whatever on your social media, then you let them know what's really happening. Podcast Juice and also, Purple Nights podcast and Prince's Friend, they do excellent work at, getting the people that were there in the studio or on the stage or grew up, whatever, to keep the legacy alive. So we should do that not only for Prince, but whoever, And I think what it is that the direction of Amari Purple Talk will evolve. It'll still be a Prince centric show, but along with that, let's deal with, who Prince was influenced by, James Brown, Michael Jackson to a point. Sly and the Family Stone, Larry Graham, Shaka Khan, Ike and Tina Turner, all of those were influenced. Joni Mitchell was an influence. So again, to keep these legends going, Smokey Robinson, let's use this platform to keep those voices going beyond. Because, like I said, it's cool that these folks are getting their money, but what happens to the artistry after that? And how is that artistry going to be protected? How is it going to be utilized? If it comes out as, great CDs and great vinyl albums, then yes, we're there with our dollars. Cool. Little t-shirt here and there, that's cool too. But, if trying to think of a Smokey Robinson song that, I guess Shop Around would definitely fit, Target or something like that. I get that. But, Tracks of My Tears or Ooh Baby Baby, something like that. Those songs, I don't want them selling, Depends or, underwear or something. Anything. No, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see Let's Go Crazy used to sell credit cards. That has nothing to do with credit cards at all, the lyrics to that song. Just use it for something that in which the song is relevant, or as it was relevant for the time that it was out and what it represented for that time. That's what I want to see. And like I said, us as a fan base, let's protect these legends, with our voices, with our platforms. Let's do that. And like I said, vote with your dollars on it. Something that's like, again, it honors the legacy, spread the word, because then you have people that'll get turned on to it, but then they'll only associate it with whatever. So if a song ends up in a film, and the film had nothing really to do with what was happening in the era in which that song was a hit, or what its historical reference was, or context, especially like when stuff ends up in a rom-com or something like that, or sometimes too, if something ends up in an MCU film, sometimes they use some classic cuts in there. And I guess, it does fit the narrative, I guess, or it fits the film, or it fits the Disney Plus show or whatever. But, when, if you got a Stevie Wonder, if you got a Prince, you got to say a Bob Dylan or something like that, then you got to kind of say, well, yeah, it's cool they use that and it worked for that song and that's great. But check this out, Or it's like, yeah, Purple Rain was cool, but you got to listen to Artificial Age, you got to peep that. So that's what we'll do from here on out. Is, like I said, this will still be a Prince-centric show. But again, let's tap into a lot of his influences too, make them relevant, as well. He had that where, he had Larry Graham and Shaka Khan, he was like putting them back in the spotlight, using his platform to say, hey, no, these two are still great. They weren't just left in the 70s. They're still great now, and you should hear them now. And that's what we need to do, So whatever happens, like I said, we'll be prepared to be that counterpoint to if they, these industry folks decide to do some silliness or, try to, put them in a light that isn't historically or culturally accurate. You know, because they're going to protect Springsteen, they're going to protect Dylan, you know, they're going to protect the Beatles, they're going to get all the exposure, and you're going to see the historical context, and Questlove's got 50 million jobs. He can only do so many documentaries. We got the Sum of Soul. Thank God. Thank you, Questlove, for that, for sure. And he's working on the Sly and the Family Stone documentary. Thank God for that. Speaking of documentaries, wasn't Prince working on a Larry Graham documentary? Didn't he need only like $500,000 for that? Can we get that finished? I want to see that documentary. What was that going to entail? So that's the thing, let's protect these legacies out there. So like I said, we have those voices. So, again, Sum of Soul was important because that was like the Beatles, hours and hours of film footage that was sitting somewhere in a vault somewhere. And I didn't know the whole story, but it's like watching that film that had the biggest impact on me. So we need more of that. So that's what, if that's what we have to do, is be that counterpoint, to where, oh, Woodstock is great, folks. The Beatles are great, folks. But, we need that Sum of Soul to be that counter voice to say, yeah, well, Woodstock was cool, but look at this. Because, Jimi Hendrix is, that's the only really black, to me, that's getting that type of level of respect is the Springsteens and the Dylans, is Hendrix, and it's like, how you gonna sweep James Brown under the rug? How you gonna sweep Smokey Robinson under the rug like that? No, they're worth more. I think they deserve more than what they've gotten, for their catalogs. Their catalogs have had more of an impact to me than Bruce Springsteen. Like I say, maybe just as much as Dylan, but I'll tell you who deserves as much as Dylan, and it may not necessarily be James Brown, but Curtis Mayfield. Because, note for note, he was putting out stuff that was, where everybody else was singing I love you or don't love you, and let's dance, and let's do this dance, and this is the dance of the week, and back to I love you, I don't love you, and all this other stuff. He was putting out the moving on up, and he was putting out the, if there's a hell below, we're all gonna go. And then, then there's the Superfly, and, Freddie's Dead, and just hit after hit after, song after song after song, and was that voice, again, of a generation as well. It's just that, again, they're quick to give Dylan that title, but not Curtis Mayfield, and then, I'd say Dylan and Mayfield, yeah, that inspired Stevie for that 70s output, and Stevie owns his masters. So yeah, I'm looking forward to whatever he decides to do with those masters at some point of that classic material. Are we going to see box sets and super deluxe editions of that? Whew. So we have to be there. So that's going to be the mission, folks. Again, like I said, still Prince-centric show, but we're going to celebrate, and let's keep that energy of positivity out there. Lots of great music that's out there, and we're kind of entering this age. Like I said, things are changing. It's kind of turning into the Matrix a little bit, folks. So we have to kind of stay unplugged, and like I say, we got to kind of work with the machines a little bit here to kind of achieve that balance, so to speak. So just keep tuning in. Thank you for tuning in. Again, follow me on social media, Richard Cole _now, or on Instagram at Richard Cole _Amari. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell on the Amari Communications channel. And be back next week. And try to see if we can get Walter on the microphone next week. If not, maybe the week after, but we'll see. Plus some other people I need to reach out to and get them to be on the mic for this show. this year as well. Got a lot of interesting stuff coming up, so stay tuned. We'll definitely be back next week for sure. And until then, try to take care of each other, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and talk to you later. Peace.
People, we're the purple party people now. Time to get on the one. Keep it on the one. So we're all the purple party people now.